Hi, Ben Caldwell here. The exam handbook for the California MFT Law Ethics Exam includes some sample questions, and it tells you what the correct answers are for those sample questions, but it doesn't explain why. We're here to help. In this video, we'll go over those sample questions and explain not just what the correct answer is, but why it's the correct answer. Now, these questions all come from the BBS California MFT Law and Ethics Exam handbook as of June 2018. That handbook is occasionally revised, so these questions in the handbook might change in the future, but this is what they are as of today. We'll start with question 1. An intern is considering asking his clinical supervisor to be his therapist. The intern would like to address ongoing personal relationship issues. Which of the following actions should the intern take to manage the ethical issue in this case? Now, this question, like many others on the Law and Ethics exam, tips you off a little bit by pointing out that it's an ethical issue they're asking about and not a legal one. But that doesn't surprise you, you probably already knew that. In this case, you probably are well aware of the concerns about dual relationships between supervisors and supervisees. You probably already know that it would not be ethical for a supervisor to simultaneously provide therapy to their supervisee. Those are two distinct roles. And so, option A, explore the relationship issues with the supervisor as part of supervision, would enter into the territory of therapy and would not be acceptable. And option B, arrange for therapy with the supervisor that is separate from supervision, also would not be acceptable. We can easily rule those two out. And that leaves option C, seek personal therapy from another therapist to avoid a dual relationship, and option D, wait until supervision hours are complete prior to initiating personal therapy. Well, option D is not a good one. It would still be a dual relationship. Even if the supervision relationship has ended, having the former supervisor be a therapist would probably impact the therapist's clinical judgment, and that's one of the big red flags around dual relationships. You want to avoid dual relationships that would impair clinical judgment or increase risk of exploitation to the client. There may not be an exploitation concern here, but there would be a concern around impaired clinical judgment because the therapist would know things about the client from their supervisory relationship, and that might impact how they see the client in therapy. So option C, seek personal therapy from another therapist to avoid a dual relationship, is pretty clearly the safest and indeed the correct answer. All right, question 2. A client initiates therapy for depression following a failed marriage. The therapist finds the client very attractive. Which of the following actions should the therapist take to manage the ethical obligation in this case? And again, this question tips you off that they're asking about an ethical issue rather than a legal one. It's really important throughout the exam to, as lawyers would say, not assume facts that are not in evidence. So this question is pretty short, and all it really tells you is that the therapist finds the client attractive. It doesn't tell you that that attraction is actively interfering with therapy, and that becomes important as we're looking through our response options. So we start with option A, suppress personal feelings of attraction and continue providing therapy. Well, this is problematic because if you simply ignore the experience of attraction, that makes it a little more likely to come out sideways. Maybe you are kinder to the client than you would be otherwise, or you in some other way treat them differently from how you would if you weren't attracted to them. So simply moving forward without taking any action to address the attraction is a problem. We can rule that one out. Option B, inform the client of the therapist's feelings and discuss therapeutic boundaries. I cannot imagine a more awkward conversation than that with a client. And informing the client of the therapist's feelings puts that client in a tremendously awkward position. It is the therapist's responsibility and not the client's to manage therapeutic boundaries. So this one we can also rule out. Option C, explain the ethical issue to the client and provide a referral to an alternate therapist. Remember, all we know here is that the therapist finds the client attractive. We don't know that that's an active problem in the therapy process. Referring out seems like a more drastic step than is necessary. We're going to rule that one out. Option D, seek consultation to manage the attraction and monitor therapeutic boundaries. Well, that makes the most sense. We don't know that there is yet a boundary issue in this case. Consultation is the best way for the therapist to manage their own attraction while also providing quality clinical care to the client. Option D is correct. Finally, question 3. A 58-year-old client who is working on childhood abuse issues has recently become the conservator of her mother's finances. The client states that now that she has control of her mother's money, she finally has extra money to buy what she wants and enjoy her own life. The client states that her mother is, quote, finally getting what she deserves, unquote. Which of the following actions should the therapist take to address the legal issue involved in this case? Because this question tips you off that they want a legal issue to be addressed, you can safely set aside any potential ethical concerns here. This is specifically a question about your legal responsibilities. And you have a legal responsibility to report elder and dependent adult abuse. In this case, we know the client is 58 years old. The fact that she is the conservator of her mother's finances leads us to quite safely assume that the mother is at least 65, which would make her an elder, and simply because of the fact that she needs a conservator, might also qualify as a dependent adult if she were younger than 65. Now, we hear from the client that she has extra money to buy what she wants and enjoy her own life, which suggests that the client is using her mother's money for her own benefit rather than the mother's benefit, and that the mother is, quote, finally getting what she deserves, which suggests that some of the motivation for taking her mother's money might be to punish the mother. That pretty clearly triggers reasonable suspicion of financial abuse, which is one of the specified categories of elder and dependent adult abuse that requires a report under California law. So you need to break confidentiality and contact an adult protective services agency. Option C is the correct answer. I hope this is helpful to you. We have a number of tools on our website to further help you in your preparation for the California MFT Law and Ethics Exam. You can get those at our website, bencaldwelllabs.com.